You would think the tank is the prize. It is not. A tank fights in one spot on the front, and when it burns, one machine is gone. But the truck that hauls its shells, its diesel, its drinking water, that truck makes dozens of tanks, guns, and infantry able to fight at all. A shell that never reaches the gun does not exist. This is the story of how Ukraine stopped hunting Russia's armor and started strangling the single road that feeds everything Russia holds in the south, the highway to Crimea. Not with one strike on the heart, with 1,000 small cuts to the artery, one fuel tanker at a time. Look at a map of Russian-occupied southern Ukraine and one thick line jumps out. It runs west from Mariupol through Berdyansk into Melitopol and down to the Chonhar crossings at the northern edge of Crimea. The Russians call it the R-280 Novorossiya Highway. On Ukrainian maps it is the M14. You can call it what it actually is, a windpipe. It is the only real land artery connecting mainland Russia, through occupied Donetsk and the occupied part of the Zaporizhzhia region, to the Crimean Peninsula and the whole grouping of Russian forces holding the south. Think of that grouping as one living body, tens of thousands of troops, hundreds of tanks and guns dug into the Zaporizhzhia line, air defense batteries, fuel farms, ammunition dumps, command posts. All of it needs to breathe. And all of it breathes through that one road. Fuel and ammunition are its blood. The R-280 is the artery carrying that blood south and west. Squeeze the artery and you do not need to touch a single tank at the front. Everything the tank needed simply stops arriving. This is not a one-off strike, and it is not last week's headline. It is the latest increment in a campaign that has run all summer and into the autumn of 2025, week after week, tanker after tanker, along the same 400 kilometers of asphalt. The number that matters in this video is not a grand total. It is the trend. And the trend is a road that is slowly ceasing to function as a road. For most of this war, the smart money said you win in the south by breaking the front, by punching through the trench lines around Robotyne and Orikhiv. Ukraine tried exactly that in 2023 and paid a brutal price for a few kilometers of steppe. So the drone units changed the question. Instead of asking how to crack the body's ribs, they asked how to cut off its air. And the air comes down one road. The weapons doing this are not the little quadcopters you have seen tipping into a trench. Those are short-range tools, 5 to 20 kilometers, battery-powered, a pilot watching a live video feed. What hunts the Crimea highway is a different animal. Mid-range, fixed-wing, one-way attack drones. Small aircraft with combustion engines reaching out to around 300 kilometers, guided in the final seconds by machine vision that no amount of radio jamming can shout down. You do not beat these by switching off your navigation signal. They see the truck. They lock onto the shape of the truck. They fly into the truck. Two names come up again and again along this corridor. One is the Signum Battalion, a Ukrainian strike unit that has made a specialty of the deep road behind Melitopol. The other is the Alpha Center of the SBU, Ukraine's security service, whose operators run their own long-range hunts down the same asphalt. Between them, they have turned an ordinary supply route into the most dangerous commute in Europe. None of this is improvised. In 2025, Ukraine's defense ministry gave the effort a name: Logistics Lockdown. The first phase alone was funded at around 5 billion hryvnia, roughly $113 million, and its entire purpose was narrow and deliberate. Build mid-range drones that can reach 300 kilometers into the occupied south and keep them there night after night, hunting the supply chain, not the front. The supply chain, the blood, not the muscle. $113 million to strangle an army without storming its trenches. Here is where the story turns almost cruel in its irony. While the road was quietly filling with burned steel, the men in charge of it were assuring Moscow that everything was fine. On the 20th of July, the Russian-installed occupation governor of the Zaporizhzhia region, Yevgeny Balitsky, reported that the highway was fully under control. Days later, the man Moscow put in charge of running and rebuilding the occupied territories, Deputy Prime Minister Marat Kusnulin, went a step further and called the situation improving. Picture a body swearing to the doctor that it feels wonderful, right up to the moment it cannot lift its own arm. The trouble was the evidence, and the evidence was being filmed by Russians themselves. Dashcam after dashcam posted to Russian channels shows the same scene: a driver rolling west toward Melitopol past a roadside graveyard of blackened cabs and gutted tankers. Not one wreck, Rows of them shoved onto the shoulder, tires burned down to the rim, fuel scorch fanned across the asphalt in long black tongues. The occupation authorities said the road was under control. Their own driver's cameras filmed a road that was anything but. A dying man insisting he is fine, while the camera in his own hand records the graveyard he is driving through. That gap between what Moscow was told and what the cameras showed is the whole story. And it did not open by accident. It was engineered kilometer by operators who understood something the occupation governors did not. You do not have to sever an artery to kill what it feeds. You only have to make the blood afraid to flow. To see how one drone crew turns a highway into a trap, you have to understand how a Russian fuel run actually works. A tanker convoy forms up at a fuel farm near Berdyansk, say, or on the approaches to Melitopol. Kamaz 6,520 tankers, heavy six-wheelers, each carrying tens of thousands of liters of diesel destined for the units on the Zaporizhzhia line or the depots feeding Crimea. Before the drones, this was a boring job. A long, dull drive down a straight road through flat country. Now every one of those kilometers is watched. The Russian answer to being watched was to drive at night, to drive fast, and to string electronic warfare jammers along the route. Trucks and fixed posts throwing out a wall of radio noise meant to blind incoming drones and cut the link between a drone and its pilot. Against a quadcopter flown by a human on a video feed, that wall works. Cut the link and the drone goes stupid and falls. So the Russians built their whole defense around cutting that link. And that is the miscalculation. The fixed-wing hunters on this road do not need the link in the final seconds. Their machine vision seekers do the last part of the job on their own. The drone climbs to altitude far from the jammers, cruises in on a route its operator set, and when it gets close it stops listening for a human voice at all. It looks. It finds the long silver shape of a tanker against the dark road. And it commits. The jamming wall the Russians spent so much effort building is a wall against a weapon Ukraine mostly stopped using on this route. By the early autumn of 2025, the hunt had a rhythm. Ukrainian reconnaissance satellite passes, longer loitering surveillance drones, the pattern of life watching that tells you when convoys move map the fuel runs. The operators learned the choke points, the bridges, the junctions, the long open stretches where a tanker cannot hide and cannot turn around. Then they waited for the trucks to come to them. The road did the herding. The drones only had to be there. That is the first payoff, and it is worth stopping on. Ukraine never had to capture a meter of this road. It never had to plant a soldier on the R-280. It simply made the road a place where fuel goes to burn and let the Russians keep sending fuel down it anyway, because they had no other way to keep the South breathing. The trap was the road itself. Now watch it close on a single convoy. The details that follow are a reconstruction. The operators do not publish their mission logs in real time, but every beat matches what geolocated footage and intercepted Russian logistics chatter have shown across dozens of these strikes on this exact corridor. Dusk, on the Melitopol stretch. A column of tankers pulls out of a fuel farm running late, which means running in the dark, which the drivers have learned to prefer. Headlights off where they dare. An escort vehicle up front with jerry cans of diesel lashed to the sides and a jammer humming on the flatbed. The convoy commander's whole plan rests on one bet: cross the open ground before anything can find them. Speed and noise. Get to the far junction, get the fuel to the depot, do it again tomorrow. 40 kilometers away, in a position that has never once appeared on the road they are driving, an operator has a fixed-wing drone already in the air. It has been up for a while, orbiting high and quiet, engine buzzing at an altitude the escort's jammer cannot reach. On the operator's screen, the road is a pale line and the convoy is a cluster of warm shapes crawling along it. The operator does not need to fly the last mile. He needs to point the aircraft at the column and let the seeker take the shot. The lead tanker is doing perhaps 70 kilometers an hour when the drone rolls in. There is no warning worth the name. The jammer is screaming into the radio spectrum and it changes nothing, because the machine in the sky stopped listening for a signal minutes ago and is now simply looking. In the last 2 seconds, the seeker settles on the largest silver shape in the frame, the tank body, tens of thousands of liters of diesel, and holds. Diesel does not explode like a movie. It burns. The impact tears the tank open, and the fireball is the fuel finding air all at once. A column of orange lifting off the road and lighting the flat country for a kilometer in every direction. The cab crumples forward into the blast. The driver did not survive. What is left rolls to a stop across both lanes, and now the burning wreck is doing a second job the drone never had to do. It is blocking the road. Behind it, the convoy does the worst possible thing, which is also the only thing it can do. It stops. Trucks brake and bunch. Drivers who cannot see past the fire do not know if there is a second drone. There usually is. A stalled column on an open road at night is not a convoy anymore. It is a row of targets holding still. Whatever else is in the air now has all the time it needs. By the time the surviving trucks scatter or reverse or push through the shoulder around the wreck, the run is finished. Some of the fuel that left the farm reaches the depot. Most of the reason it mattered is gone. The refueling point at the far end receives a fraction of the diesel it was promised, and a fraction of a fuel load is not a counterattack. It is a tank that stays parked, a generator that runs half the night, a kitchen that goes cold. That is one convoy on one night. Now multiply it. Multiply it across the summer, across Signum's sector and Alpha's sector, across a road 400 kilometers long where every open stretch is a potential kill zone and every driver knows it. This is the 1,000 cuts. No single strike decides anything. Together they decide everything. The clearest measure of what the cuts added up to came from the Ukrainian side, and it is a one-sided claim worth stating plainly and once. Ukraine's drone forces commander, the officer known by the call sign Bravdi, said that over a roughly 2-week window cargo traffic on the corridor fell by around 70 to 75%, from something like 3,800 trucks a day down to about 1,100. That is Ukraine's figure, and Ukraine has every reason to publish a big one. Take it as a claim, not gospel. But you do not have to take Ukraine's word for the direction of travel, because the Russian side described the same road under a different light. Kusnulin himself put the traffic on the route at around 7,000 vehicles a day, roughly 3,000 of them trucks, and acknowledged that hit vehicles were being reported daily, most of them fuel tankers. Read those two accounts together and the disagreement is only about the size of the wound, not whether the body is bleeding. Every day on the record, tankers are burning on the road to Crimea. The occupation's own numbers say so. And here the artery being cut starts to tell on the far end of the body. Crimea began to starve. Through the late summer and into autumn, the peninsula slid into a fuel crisis that was impossible to hide. Filling stations rationed drivers to 20 liters per car, barely enough to matter. Queues formed and stayed formed. The occupation authorities blamed everything except the obvious, but the shape of it was unmistakable. For something on the order of 2.5 months, Crimea was effectively cut off from reliable overland fuel supply from the mainland. The Kerch bridge and rail could carry some of it. The road was supposed to carry the rest. The road was on fire. At the center of that squeeze sat the Jankoy junction, the point in northern Crimea where the roads and rail from the mainland come together and fan out across the peninsula. Choke the flow into Jankoy and you choke Crimea. That is exactly what a degraded R-280 does. Not a clean cut. The throughput and the reliability of the road, not the asphalt itself, are what Ukraine broke. But an army does not run on the days the road works. It runs on being able to count on the road every day. Take away the certainty, and you have taken away the supply. Even on the nights nothing burns. The driver who makes it through still spent the whole run waiting for the fireball. That waiting is a weapon too. Now watch the failure climb back up the body from the numbed limb toward the muscle. An army that cannot count on fuel and shells cannot attack. Through this same stretch of the war, the Russian push on the southern front did what a body does when its blood runs thin. It slowed. It stalled. Not because Ukraine broke the trench line at last, but because the thing behind the trench line, the steady river of diesel and ammunition that any offensive actually runs on, had been turned into a gamble. You cannot mass for an assault on fuel that might not arrive. And when an army stalls, the man at the top looks for someone to blame. Through the autumn, Putin reshuffled his commanders, the familiar Kremlin ritual of firing generals when the map refuses to move. But the map was not refusing to move because of the generals. It was refusing to move because $113 million of fixed-wing drones had spent months teaching the south of Russia's war a simple lesson. The fuel does not get there anymore, or not reliably, or not without burning. You can fire every general in the theater. None of them can conjure diesel onto a road the enemy owns from the air. Here is the micro-truth the whole campaign rests on. Ukraine never severed this road. it was never trying to. Severing the road would have been a single dramatic act, easy to repair, easy for Moscow to explain. What Ukraine did instead was quieter and far worse for the body it was strangling. It made the road unreliable. It made every fuel run a coin flip. It made the artery narrow a little more each week, so slowly that the occupation governors could keep telling Moscow the patient was fine right up until the patient could not stand. Remember Balitsky's fully under control on the 20th of July. Remember Kosnulin's improving. Now set those words next to 20-liter fuel rations in Crimea, a 70% collapse in truck traffic that even Moscow's own numbers half confirm, and a southern offensive that ran out of breath. Two statements to Putin, and a road full of the evidence that both were lies, filmed, helpfully, by the dash cams of the very drivers being sent down it. The strategic accounting is the part that outlasts any single burning tanker. A tank destroyed at the front removes one machine. A fuel corridor degraded for months removes the ability of an entire grouping to do anything but hold on. The drone that burned that lead tanker on the Melitopol stretch cost a few $1,000s. The thing it damaged, the confidence that fuel and shells will arrive in the south of an occupied country, cannot be bought back at any price, because it does not depend on the wreck on the road. It depends on the next driver's certainty that he will get through. And that certainty is gone. There is a temptation, watching those dash cams, to feel something for the man behind the wheel. Resist it. Every one of those drivers is hauling the diesel that keeps an invading army fighting on land that was never Russia's to take. The camera is evidence, not a eulogy. Another contract soldier learned that special military operation is a phrase that ends, for far too many of them, as a burned cab across 2 lanes of someone else's highway. He chose to cross a border that was not his to cross. The road did the rest. The body is still standing. That is the thing to understand at the end. Ukraine never dropped it with a single blow, never stabbed the heart, never even cut the artery all the way through. It just kept tightening one tanker one night, one cut at a time, until the grouping that was told the road to Crimea was safe found it could no longer breathe through it. The generals get replaced. The rations get shorter. The queues in Jankoy get longer. And somewhere over the flat country north of Melitopol, another fixed-wing drone is already up, orbiting quiet and high, waiting for the next set of headlights to come running down the artery in the dark.